Please note this podcast discusses real-life crimes and may include sensitive topics such as violence, abuse, and other disturbing content. We recommend listener discretion.
He's telling me he's going to kill me. He's just in a complete wild rage. He caught me with a couple of unlucky blows, and I thought if he knocks me down and gets my knife out of my hand, he's going to use it on me without a shadow of a doubt. I can't fight. But then I struck out.
I'm journalist Helen Fospero.
I'm crime reporter Martin Brunt.
And this is True Criminals.
A journey into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld with insights from decades of true crime reporting.
The stories behind the stories, plus exclusive interviews with those closely involved in notorious cases.
Re-examining crimes so shocking, they still haunt our imaginations.
On a damp Sunday morning in 1996, a brutal roadside stabbing shocked Britain. Stephen Cameron, just 21 years old, died in the arms of his fiancée Danielle Cable after a clash of egos and knives on the M25. The killer, a man whose name had already carved itself into criminal history, Kenneth Noye. In this episode of True Criminals, we explore a case about both a fugitive's cunning and about justice creaking under the weight of fear. Martin has tracked Noye's criminal trail for decades, from the Brink's gold heist to the Spanish villa where Noye finally lost his freedom. We'll explore the road rage murder that left a young man dead and a nation stunned, the cat-and-mouse hunt across Europe, and the chilling web of witness intimidation which forced survivors to vanish into new lives. How does a man acquitted of killing a policeman walk free only to kill again? And what's the cost of testifying against a man like Noye when the system can't always keep you safe? Martin, the story of Kenneth Noye really seems to have run parallel in many ways with your own career and decades of reporting. But let's go back to 1996. How did you first realise that Noye might be involved in Stephen Cameron's murder?
Helen, sometimes a scoop stares you in the face, literally, though on this occasion I missed it completely. I was in a pub with Mike Cobb, who at the time was Scotland Yard press officer, their very best, very media-orientated, and was somebody who'd become a friend of mine. In fact, he'd just taken me around the Black Museum at Scotland Yard on a day off. We went to the pub. He picked up the Evening Standard that was lying on the bar and pointed to a new photo fit of the suspect for the road rage killing and said to me, "Don't you think that looks like Kenny Noye?" And I thought it was said more as a joke than anything else. I shrugged it off. I didn't think it looked anything like him. And I thought that Noye was still in prison at that stage for the Brink's robbery. Weeks later, another friend of mine, the Mirror's Christian Guyson, got a tip that Noye, using the alias Anthony Francis, was indeed the killer, or at least the suspect that police were hunting. Christian compared the photo fit to an old dinner jacket photo of Noye and said it was the spitting image. I still wasn't convinced, but I kicked myself for missing the scoop. Christian told me later that he went to see the detective in charge of the hunt for the M25 killer, and the detective surprisingly invited him into his office. Christian told him that he thought that Noye was the suspect, and the detective wouldn't confirm or deny it. So Christian then said, "Well, why have you got a blown-up photograph of Noye's mansion on the wall behind you?" Which, of course, the detective found very difficult to explain away.
So you thought Noye was in prison, which I suppose is perhaps why you were kicking yourself for missing it. Fair enough, thinking he was in jail. But you'd crossed paths with Noye before, hadn't you?
I had. Not face-to-face, but my first encounter with the Noye story, I suppose, was flying over that Kent mansion in a helicopter the day after his acquittal. He'd been acquitted for stabbing the undercover cop, Detective Constable John Fordham, who had been hiding in his garden. He was investigating the Brink's missing gold. Noye admitted killing the officer, but claimed he acted in self-defence, and the jury believed him. But he later went down for the lesser crime of handling the £26 million which was the gold bullion that was stolen in that 1983 raid on the Brinksmack warehouse at Heathrow Airport. So he got off the murder, but he went down for a long time for handling the proceeds. He'd been out of prison from that sentence for only a couple of years or so when he stabbed and killed 21-year-old Stephen Cameron.
So what happened on the M25 on Sunday, May the 19th, 1996?
Stephen Cameron was 21, an electrician, and he was in a van with his fiancée Danielle Cable when a Land Rover cut them up on a slip road near Swanley in Kent. We think that's what happened, or that was the catalyst for what then happened, but it never really became clear why the two men started fighting, even, I think, at the trial that I covered. Anyway, a fight broke out and Cameron was stabbed twice. He died in Danielle's arms. Noye fled to Spain eventually, but not before Danielle gave police a photo fit. For 2 years, Noye evaded capture, and there were all sorts of alleged sightings of him and rumours he was in the Caribbean or he was in northern Cyprus, even that wherever he'd fled to, he was coming back regularly to his old haunts in Kent. The police in Kent finally tracked him to a villa in Cadiz.
How did they catch him?
Well, again, it's not really clear, and I think police were very reluctant at the time to explain fully how they got on to him. Police don't always like to expose their methods. It could have been a tip from a tourist who recognised Noye as the wanted man, a betrayed informant, or GCHQ phone taps, or, and I think this was perhaps the most likely theory, that police simply had his wife Brenda under surveillance and followed her onto a flight from Luton Airport. But once he'd been identified in Spain before his arrest, the police flew Danielle out there, and she observed him from a distance sitting in a restaurant, and she said that that was the man who'd stabbed her fiancé. The Spanish cops arrested Noye at El Campero restaurant. He was halfway through his meal. At his extradition hearing that I covered in Madrid, he glared at us reporters like a caged animal. He stared us all out one by one. We all blinked first. His lawyer, Spanish lawyer, claimed that Danielle's photo fit was wrong. And he also argued in front of the extradition judges that he'd never get a fair trial in England because of the publicity around him being a suspect. But the judges didn't buy that. It took a long time, but he was eventually extradited. And Noye's UK lawyer, Henry Milner, who's since become a friend, said he knew the judges would extradite him because they didn't ask him any questions, and they smoked throughout the hearing.
At the trial, Noye pleaded not guilty and again used that argument of self-defence. How did that play out this time?
Well, the trial was sensational at the Old Bailey. It emerged that the two men got out of their vehicles and confronted one another at traffic lights on that M25 slip road. Again, there was no real explanation for what prompted it. Noye claimed that in the punch-up that ensued, Cameron got the better of him, and Stephen Cameron was younger, fitter and a lot taller than Kenny Noye, who's quite a small man. Noye claimed that Cameron got the better of him and was threatening to do more. So according to Noye, this is what he told the jury: "I took the knife out and pointed it. I see him and then said, 'Don't come near me, you nutcase.' His girlfriend was shouting, 'Get off. He's telling me he's going to kill me. He's just in a complete wild rage. He caught me with a couple of unlucky blows, and I thought if he knocks me down and gets my knife out of my hand, he's going to use it on me without a shadow of a doubt. I can't fight. I was worn out. I can't remember how exactly I'd done it, but then I struck out. I had my head down, and we were moving about close together, and I just struck out. I can only remember striking out once, but I accept it was twice. He definitely knew I had the knife.' So that's what happened according to Noye. The jury this time didn't buy his argument of self-defence. But the prosecution during the trial couldn't mention that Noye had been on trial earlier for the stabbing of DC Fordham, even though he was acquitted. They couldn't mention it during this second trial because it would have prejudiced the jury. But halfway through the trial, Noye volunteered that history. It was a huge gamble. He told the jury effectively through his lawyer that he'd been acquitted of DC Fordham's murder. And he claimed that that's why he'd had to flee, because he'd never get a fair trial. The jury didn't buy it, and he was convicted and handed a life sentence. I mean, effectively, Noye admitted that earlier trial and his acquittal because he had to explain, among other things, why he carried a knife. He said he was always worried about someone targeting him for revenge for killing the officer.
Were journalists like you, Martin, quite surprised, and lawyers as well, quite surprised that he chose that option and he did decide to reveal that?
It was a real shock. We all, of course, were aware of his past. And I think maybe part of his thinking was that he had a very unusual name. The murder of DC Fordham all those years ago was a notorious murder. And I think if one of the jurors had recognised that name, Kenneth Noye, that juror could have told the others and it would have rebounded on him. In the end, of course, he took that big gamble and it didn't pay off.
And what about the aftermath of all of this? Once he'd been handed his life sentence, what happened to the other characters, including Danielle?
Well, firstly, there was continuing drama because Alan de Cabral, who was a Hell's Angel who'd testified against Noye, he said he'd witnessed the stabbing. He was shot dead 6 months later. Now, was that retaliation by Noye's people? Perhaps, but police couldn't prove it. They went to interview Noye in prison as a potential suspect, but Noye obviously wasn't going to talk to them about it. But Danielle Cable, she went into the witness protection scheme, and she's still there today, married with a daughter, apparently, living as someone else, living longer under her new identity than she ever did as Danielle Cable.
If you like the show and want to listen ad-free, head over to patreon.com/True Criminals. You can now subscribe to our ad-free tier for just £4 a month and get unlimited access to our entire back catalogue, completely uninterrupted.
Or if you love the show and want to support what we do, you can become a True Criminals Insider.
For just £3 a month, becoming an insider means you're directly supporting the podcast you love. Your support helps us create even more captivating stories and dive deeper into the most gripping true crime cases. It keeps the show going and the stories alive.
So whether you want ad-free listening or to help support the show, head over to patreon.com/True Criminals and choose the option that works for you.
Thanks for listening and for all your support. We couldn't do this without you.
Step into the world of Cold War summitry with Creating History. From Kennedy and Khrushchev's nuclear brinkmanship to Nixon's high-wire act between Beijing and Moscow, and onto Reagan and Gorbachev rewriting the rules. Explore the handshakes, glares, and gambles of summits that redrew the 20th century. Stream Creating History now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Tell us a bit more about witness protection. I think, for me, it's something I think of when I watch these American FBI kind of cop dramas, and you don't really hear about it much in Britain. What does it actually mean, and does it happen when somebody's identity is then really at risk?
Yes, and we can only think that she was offered a place in the scheme because there was real concern that she could become a target in revenge for giving evidence against Noye. And one of the witnesses against Noye was killed 6 months after the trial. I suppose she's a victim not just of the trauma of watching her fiancé being stabbed, but also of having to give up everything of her past. She sacrificed her own entire identity. Witness protection, anybody who goes into witness protection, it means leaving everybody behind. You just can't tell anybody where you're going. You have to lie about your past. Now, another man who gave evidence against Kenneth Noye in a very different crime, the so-called hole-in-the-wall gang, an ATM scam, Martin Grant, I met him at some stage and interviewed him about life in the witness protection scheme. Remarkably, he was happy to talk to me and to be identified on camera. But he said, well, if anybody wants to kill me, they know what I look like. and he hadn't made any attempt to disguise himself. But he told me that he lived in constant fear of revenge from Noye. He said, "I only have to hear something at the door and I jump. Many protected witnesses crack under the isolation." And I should say that although Martin Grant gave evidence against Noye, Noye wasn't ever charged as part of that ATM scam, but he was named by a judge in the trial of others as one of the conspirators.
It must really be quite terrifying and cast a massive shadow on the rest of your life. And of course, the threats extend beyond witnesses, don't they?
Yes, the true crime writer Wensley Clarkson, who we've interviewed in episode 23 about the Hatton Garden heist, he was told about a rather chilling copy of his biography of Noye ending up in prison. I think the story was that Noye had given it to one of his friendly prison guards, but had inscribed it in the words in which he talked about Wensley Clarkson and how he'd written this terrible biography of him. And Noye wrote in the cover of this book, "The tables will turn one day." Noye's rage isn't always so subtle. After being convicted at the Old Bailey of the Brink's Mat robbery, or handling the proceeds of the robbery, he screamed at jurors, "I hope you'll all die of cancer."
Nice. Where is Noye now?
He's out on licence. He's in his late 70s. His Spanish villa, the one where he was holed up before his arrest, is now worth 1.9 million euros. If he still owns it, that's a valuable asset. He kept his temper in check as far as we know, because he hasn't been arrested or convicted of anything else. But who knows what his future is? As Ben Kingsley's character in the Heist movie Sexy Beast said, "Some villains crave the charge, the bolt, the buzz, the sheer fuck-offness of it all." So whether Noye shares that itch for one last heist, we may never know.
All feels very chilling. This case feels like a collision of so many themes: justice, fear, and the shadow of a man who seemed to outwit the system repeatedly. What does Kenneth Noye's story, do you think, tell us about the nature of crime and punishment?
Well, I suppose we don't have the death penalty, and it shows one of the UK's most notorious criminals, a double killer, can serve a long prison sentence and couple of sentences and come out and carry on and live what seems to be a normal, healthy and enjoyable life. I think it's a stark reminder that the law's not black and white. It operates in shades of grey. Noye's acquittal for killing DC Fordham hinged on self-defence, and that's a legal concept that's both vital and vulnerable. Yet here was a man who used that same defence years later, even after a life steeped in violence. It begs the question, can somebody like Noye ever be truly rehabilitated? Or does the system just put the odd brake on their chaos? It seems to me that he probably is rehabilitated. Occasionally he's photographed in the media going about what appears to be a rather mundane life. He did, a couple of years ago, sit down and do a podcast.
Did he?
He did, but it never ran. And I guess I would like to talk to him. I don't know whether you would like to interview a man who's killed a police officer and gone to prison for the murder of somebody else. I think it would be fascinating, but there's a big moral question about whether we should give publicity to people like him. What do you think?
I think it'd be very interesting for you to interview as your role as a crime correspondent. It would be a bit of a moral dilemma, I think, wouldn't it? And if we're faced with that option, then we'll choose the fat then and decide whether to do it. But I think in your day-to-day line of work, it would probably be acceptable. He's served his time, hasn't he?
It would be fascinating. And there are many criminals I've interviewed, and I do think for the public to understand their motivation, their feelings and so forth, sometimes you can argue that it's an important thing. But I think in the case of Kenny Noye, I think the moral question about giving him any kind of publicity, oxygen of publicity, as Margaret Thatcher called it about terrorists, I don't know that we'd ever do it.
No. What about the victims? Danielle Cable literally sacrificed who she was. Stephen Cameron's family lost a son. Is witness protection a lifeline, or in some ways, is it another kind of sentence?
I think it's both. Some people cope, lots don't. I think the common theme that I've concluded from talking to a number of people who've gone into it is that they're always disappointed by what it means, because they think that as a reward for their help, they're going to be given lots of money, a better home and a more lavish lifestyle. But that's not how it happens, because the police thinking is that you get like for like, and it's better for you in the long term that you don't have to adjust to something very different. You're going to have to make huge adjustments anyway, but it's important. The feeling is that you live the life that you led before, the style of life you led before, but a long way from where you were living and with a different identity. But people tend to be disappointed, and that might explain why not everybody stays in the scheme and they eventually go back to their old haunts.
I think it would feel really suffocating to me just to not be the person you know you actually are, and to be cut off from friends, family, loved ones. It almost feels like it's trading one prison for another in a way.
Yes, Danielle Cable separated from everyone she once loved. Martin Grant, the computer expert who turned informant against Noye, he told me he lives in constant dread. I think it is true for some. It's trading one prison for another.
And Noye himself, a businessman to some, a psychopath to others. How does someone like him, Martin, command loyalty and fear in equal measure, do you think?
Well, I think if you're someone who's killed a policeman and is acquitted, I think you're sure of a certain kind of respect and fear in the underworld, at least. Before the road rage murder, he was always considered a villain cleverer than most and widely connected in the criminal world and the police world. A lot was said at the time of his membership of the Freemasonry, at a time when that could provide you with influence on both sides of the law. Essentially, you crossed a man like that at your peril.
The media plays a role here too, Martin. I suppose sometimes scoops can derail manhunts, and I know that you're always very careful about your reporting and being really responsible, but journalists like yourself must have to weigh up your role quite carefully in cases like this.
Yes, I suppose the problem is that they are very attractive figures for crime reporters, attractive in the sense that they are part of very, very big stories. But what do? We just are very careful in how we cover their stories. We are careful not to glamorise them. I suppose in the case of Kenneth Noye, there's nothing much to glamorise there. But they are important figures in the world of a crime reporter.
And of course, public interest demands transparency, doesn't it? Finally, after decades of trials, escapes and headlines, do you think justice has been served?
I think on paper, yes. Noye served his time. He did the sentences that he was given. If he had been convicted of murdering the undercover detective, he'd have got a much longer sentence, I'm sure. But he was acquitted. He was found not guilty. So you have to respect the verdict of the jury. Even though he admitted stabbing the officer, his argument that it was in self-defence was the powerful argument that won the day in court. The system eventually stopped Noye, but it couldn't undo the collateral damage. Danielle, she lost her identity. Alan de Cabral was murdered. Martin Grant had suffered paranoia. And that's the tragedy. Does a sentence ever truly balance the scales? And I think for many, the answer is no.
A haunting thought to end on, Martin. Great to hear your insight, as ever. There are some debts, it seems, that even justice can't settle. Martin's book, No One Got Cracked Over the Head for No Reason, Dispatches of a Crime Reporter, is out now in paperback. And to celebrate that, Martin's going to read an excerpt from his Fugitives chapter.
Pounding the crime beat day after day is always challenging, but it can be wearing too. There is precious little fun or good news. If terrorism is the most grim, serious part of a crime reporter's brief, then hunting fugitives from justice can sometimes feel like light relief. Many journalists have spent a lot of enjoyable time on the trail of Lord Lucan, the Earl who vanished after the notorious murder of his children's nanny, Sandra Rivet, in the family's home in Belgravia, London. Apparently, he had mistaken the nanny for his wife Veronica, Lady Lucan. Since he disappeared in 1974, there have been regular supposed sightings of Lucan across the world, but his fate is unknown and he's still a wanted man. Reporters haven't stopped looking for him. An old Daily Mirror colleague, Garth Gibbs, claimed that not finding Lucan had been the highlight of his career. He acknowledged that his rivals, too, had enjoyed some success in not locating the missing peer. But he insisted, "I regard not finding Lord Lucan as my most spectacular success in journalism. I have successfully not found him in more exotic spots than anybody else. I spent 3 glorious weeks not finding him in Cape Town, magical days and nights not finding him in the Black Mountains of Wales, and wonderful and successful short breaks not finding him in Macau either, or in Hong Kong, or even in Green Turtle Cay in the Bahamas, where you can find anyone." No one has calculated how much journalists have claimed in expenses as they travelled the world in pursuit of Lord Lucan. His nickname, Lucky, could be applied to those who've been sent to look for him. Of course, some don't really want to find him. The canny Scots editor and columnist Sir John Juna once observed, "Laddie, you don't ever want to shoot the fox. Once the fox is dead, there is nothing left to chase."
Hey listeners, True Criminals is a new show and your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps us grow, reach new listeners, and keep bringing you the stories you love. This episode is brought to you by Audio Bleach Global. Our producer is Russell Barnes, with audio production by Andrew Chappell. The original score was composed by Chap Mannequin, artwork by Bleached, executive produced by Lee Mann. Follow True Criminals on Instagram at true.criminals and on YouTube at youtube.com/@true-criminals. For exclusive content and ways to support the show, visit us at patreon.com/True Criminals. For partnership opportunities, please contact us at contact@audiobleachglobal.com.